I'd like to welcome you this afternoon to our student panel, and we have a couple of faculty members that have joined us as well. My name is Iris Pretty Paint. I work in a new initiative here at the university called ROSNA, and it stands for Research Opportunities in Science for Native Americans. I'm one of the co-directors, and my colleague is Dr. Penny Kukut back here. And I joined the university here this past semester. Prior to that, I'm coming from working in several different tribal colleges, and I've been involved with them for about 20 years, doing research and teaching, and I did my dissertation over at Fort Peck Community College. And so as I was invited by the committee to come and talk about curriculum, actually, and I suggested that it would be much more interesting if we could hear from the students. My dissertation was on capturing the students' stories, and so I wanted to hear from some of the students here at the university, and so we titled this I think it's in their own words, or in our own words, either one. But what I was interested in was the whole notion of how you go about finding, well, I guess the balance or the integration of your own cultural background, your own traditional knowledge, and how do you go about balancing that and integrating that as you begin to learn science. The whole idea of researching and studying and trying to capture all of the terminology and processes that accompany, that whole knowledge area. And so today, I've asked several of the students to come and if they would, think about the process that they individually went through, we'll call it their journey. And I'd like to speak just a little bit about mine. I grew up in Browning all my life. I used to say that the only time I left the reservation was to get another piece of paper that said I could make more money. But I grew up with my mom's mother, and when I stopped and thought about it, it was sort of a way of life. And you'll hear that when people talk about traditional knowledge, they'll use phrases to try to explain so other people will understand what they mean themselves personally when they talk about this whole idea of traditional knowledge. So I've been fortunate over the years. I'm a good listener, and I listen to how people talk about this, and I want to share with you. It's not necessarily a definition, but it'll give you some idea of what tribal people think of when they use this phrase, traditional knowledge. We talk about traditional knowledge being something that's passed down from generation to generation. And it's usually passed down through oral tradition, meaning that it's not written. It's spoken or it's conveyed through stories. And what happens in that process is that information enables us to begin to have a solid foundation on our identity, who we are, where we come from. And interestingly, that has been connected to our own survival. The more we know about who we are and where we come from, we believe that that's one of the reasons we're still here today. So you begin to get a sense of, really what does that mean? Doesn't that happen with all people in a sense? And when we think about traditional knowledge, that knowledge, the more it's connected to our language, the stronger it is, the deeper it goes. And the deeper you go in to anything in a culture to understand it, that's where you begin to find the interconnectedness, the relationships. And so when you think about that and you begin to teach young people that come from that worldview, how do you begin to take things apart as you begin to put together a research design when everything's connected? How do you begin to isolate variables when you're going to see the cause and effect of something, when your worldview, you have a hard time trying to find the permission to do that? Who do I ask? And so you might struggle with comparisons because you're trying to compare two things that in your view, they're not equal, they shouldn't be compared, let alone write about it. So the journey into understanding what traditional knowledge is coming to a place where you realize that there are some aspects to traditional knowledge that are shared, and there's some that are localized. They only apply to that person, or they only apply to that family, or they only apply to that community. And they're not generalizable. You cannot take them any place. And so how do you explain that in research? When you say, you know, I just can't generalize this information because it only belongs to this tribe. So some of the words that people use that I've heard over the years is they say, you know, it's a way of life. It's a way of thinking or looking at this world. And it's, you know, we're exposed to so many things that what we learn to do is sometimes take our traditions, and I've heard people say that they've Indianized things, they've indigenized things, because they've been exposed to other cultures, other tribes, and pretty soon you begin to see things emerge in a way of life that weren't there before. And so how do you take all of that and still hold on to it as you come in to higher education and you begin to learn about science, and how do you balance or integrate who you are with a whole nother way of thinking? And how do you learn how to articulate that so the people that are reading your papers can follow you? How do you find the words that help you to explain what it is, you know, that you're trying not to violate the sacred? You're trying to explain to someone that really what you know is the truth in your way of life. But in scientific terms, it hasn't been proven yet. You know, there's not enough testing been done. And so in my brief journey coming into the program that I studied, I struggled with trying to understand what theory was. And I sort of thought I knew what it was, but just when I would have somebody explain it to me real clear, there'd be another class that I would take and they'd have a whole new way of looking at it. And theory was something that just seemed to always run away from me. And I would, you know, I could understand formulas and I could apply those, but theory was always the one that sort of just really puzzled me. And so I took it upon myself to choose a dissertation where I would actually develop a theory. And I thought, you know, I don't know anybody else that chose to go down that road. But the frustrating thing for me was when I started my literature review, everybody that I was studying was not from my culture that had written theory. And so what I was doing was I was adapting, and I was taking bits and pieces and trying to put together a theoretical framework that would support what I wanted to do, and it wasn't working. It was hard work because you had to do so much review of the literature because you didn't want to leave anybody out. But again, you had that pull inside of you that said, you know, isn't that interesting that everybody I have that's going to support my work is not from who I am? And, you know, what am I going to do? And so I went to my committee and I thought, you know, well, they all have their PhDs, they should know. And when I sat down and sort of presented my thoughts to them, they said, well, why can't you develop a theory? I said, me? Well, one of the things that I realized is that oppression and colonization, what it takes away from you is that you feel like you have to ask for permission. But you have to come to a point where you don't have to ask for permission and just do it. And that's what I did. And I came out with a beautiful theory. I've talked about this theory in many places, and indigenous people, when I explain it to them, they get it. They tell me, you know, that, you know, it's not that I've discovered anything new, but I've put it in order. I found the sequence to be able to tell the story. So, you know, I really think that wherever these students are today in their work, I'm interested to hear from them. I want to hear how they think. There's no right and wrong, but I want to hear from their heart, you know, sort of how they think about this, how they feel about it, and, you know, they'll tell you their journey. And so I'll pass the microphone. John, it's dangerous to sit on this side of me because I always have to go to you. So tell us what you're studying, tell us where you are in your program, and then whatever you want to bring out from how you've learned to balance things is going to be okay.
Hello, can you hear me? Hear me good? I'm John Hill. I'm a first-year grad student in the College of Forestry and Conservation. Trying to take on for my master's degree in resource conservation. See, I'm from Pryor, Montana. I'm a Bzaluga, that's Crow. And with that, I'll tell you a little about myself. I grew up in a pretty traditional family. I was taught basically our way of life at a young age, and practiced those ways ever since I was a young boy. And we talk about traditional knowledge, and I mean, that's what Western science calls it, or whatever is traditional knowledge. But that's my way of life. That's how I grew up. I grew up living these things, and so that's kind of my science. And I also look at traditional knowledge as a process of thousands of years of cause and effect, or trial and error that has been that natives have found out that basically got us here. We learn through trial and error, just like science. We ain't objective. We ain't brought up to be questioned, and or like say if my elder tells me something and I don't question him. I mean, that's how it was. It's been like that for thousands of years. So I don't question that. That's just how it is. And then there's that, and so the Western science is the thing that puzzles me. Is we go to class and they tell us, so why is this? Why is it like this? Why is that? And my elders taught me never to do that. I mean, I get they ask me that and I don't know what to say, and I don't know how to approach it, and just it's a thing I can't define. It's breaking my traditions. And another thing is that sacrifice. Our culture is brought with sacrifice, and she was telling me, how do we get through things? And I was talking with Yvonne Peter on the way from lunch yesterday, and I was explaining to him. He said, I said, you know, I said, my elders asked me, said, when are you gonna come home? You got your bachelor's degree. When are you gonna come home, and stuff like that. And I told him that, and he goes, oh yeah. I said my people tell me that too. I said, when are you gonna come home? You're our chief. You're supposed to lead our people. And I said, yeah. I said, that's true. But you know, our people have this notion of sacrifice, just like the Sweat Lodge. We lay on the ground with Mother Earth, and we pray to her, and just this whole cycle. And I use me not being able to go home and sacrifice and practice my spiritual our ceremonies and stuff and participate in our ceremonies, I take a different approach because I'm sacrificing my way of life and being with my family and my people for me to go home and help them and to better them and help them to understand how we can use science to save our culture and stuff like that. And I know we all listen to Robin's traditional cultural relationship with the landscape. I feel, in my opinion, that's one of the biggest things that from my opinion, I need to approach and address, because I look at our young people, even people my age I grew up with. Like I said, I grew up in a traditional family, and a lot of my friends grew up in more Christianized families, and I see that difference between us. I have that. I see I'm able to show respect and stuff like that, and where they don't have that respect. My friends don't have that respect. And one good example, one time me and my father-in-law were driving down the road, and I had my friend with me, and then my friend just started saying like these degrading stuff and like to my father-in-law and stuff like that. And then my father-in-law just looked at me and put his head down, kept driving, and he's a pretty traditional man too. And as soon as we dropped my friend off and we got off, and he goes, "You know what, John?" He said, "That's one thing I really admire about you. You have a real good sense of your people and who you are and things like that." But yeah, so I'm kind of proud of who I am and things like that. But I think I kind of went off topic. but yeah, one of the biggest things I was saying is being questioned and stuff like that. And I understand all this stuff like that, the integration, trying to integrate our way of life with science, and I don't know how it's difficult, for me. Now that I'm in my master's program, I was taught the undergrad way. Now that I'm in my master's program, I don't know, I'm having trouble with this thought, like you were saying, with theory. I mean, because you're asking this question, but I was taught not to ask questions, so just even to formulate my question for my thesis is really hard for me. I mean, I got so much knowledge, that things that I want to learn. I have all this knowledge that I want to learn, and things I can help for my people, but there's nobody out there that really understand where I'm coming from. So yeah. But yeah, I'm just. You have any questions? Or just if you have any questions, let me know. Just kind of, yeah.
We'll take the questions when we.
Okay, all right, and but yeah, that's my biggest hurdle being in grad school is finding that, being able to formulate my question when I was taught not to question. So, but am I missing anything? All right. Well, okay.
Thank you, John.
My name is Shandine Pete. I'm from Arley, Montana. Salish and Navajo. Grew up in Arley most of my life. Went through public school. Went through tribal college for my bachelor's degree at Salish Kootenai College. I've been in school here since about 2000, 2001. Pretty much same thing John said, when you grow up around your people, you learn a certain way to act or conduct yourself. You learn certain things from your traditional ways, your ceremonies, even your language. You develop a sense of your world that you live in. But when you enter into this Western education, you're challenging yourself, or you get challenged by having to prove everything that you say is right. That's one thing I was telling my daughter, that when you start getting into higher education, you have to prove everything you say. You can't just go out and say something. You have to look up a reference and find where somebody else said it. So one of the struggles that I've always had, through school is that, that bird is blue. Oh, how do you know? Oh, look at it, it's blue. Well, who else said that it's blue? Why do I have to do that, you know? So, but understanding that how Western education works is I think a challenge for a lot of people who are raised more traditionally, because, like you said, sometimes you don't question things, and if you do, you know, you do it in a respectful manner that is appropriate. So sometimes it seems like a lot of work, a lot of extra work to just prove what you're saying, you know, when you talk about making a thesis statement, you know, about something. That's pretty important in Western education, but geez, if somebody told me, you know, one of my elders told me about some plant, you know, I'd just believe him. I'd say, well, go prove it, you know, show me, you know. But I kind of got sidetracked. I'm studying geology. I'm at the end of my master's program and entering into a PhD under the same program of geology, studying groundwater and restored rivers systems. Pretty much, you know, a lot of it comes down to that issue where you have to prove everything you say, and you know, that's just the way education is. Western education is these days, and we just have to deal with it the best we can. We try hard, and if you're ever around a bunch of Indians, you know, where we're kind of wild and rowdy, and we like to talk dirty and make jokes, and sometimes people don't understand that in the educational system, you know. So like I'm pretty much the only Native American in my department. So when I go up there, you know, the way they talk and the way they conduct themselves is far different than I would. So I don't hang out there much. So I guess on that issue too, you know, in the issue of even getting into school or getting beyond high school, you know, you have to do a lot of bragging about yourself. You use the word I did this, I did that, I did this, you know, on your applications, and that's really, it's kind of uncomfortable for me to write that way or to talk like that. I hear people do it all the time in my department. Oh yeah, I'm doing this. Oh, I got this. I'm doing that. And maybe it's just those people, but for me it's hard to do that. Even when I'm writing my thesis, it just kind of dawned on me in this past semester that in reading other people's work, you know, they put a lot of I's in there. I performed this. I did this certain study. Then I go back and read mine, and I have no I's in there. Maybe 3 or 4 I's, you know, when I say I did something. I probably don't even have 1 I in there, I think. I don't know. Yeah, nowhere to be found. So understanding, I don't know why I write like that. I'm not sure why I do that. I think it has roots in the way that we're raised. As far as traditional knowledge is concerned, I mean, it's just like I said earlier, you get told something and you believe it until you observe something otherwise. I remember reading, some anthropologist was writing a report about a story about our people. There's a certain story that we have about the sun and the moon, how it came to be. That it's one person. That the moon and the sun is one person. And in this report, the anthropologist asked him, well, how do you explain when the sun and the moon both up at the same time? And in that report, the anthropologist said that the Indian just looked at him and laughed. You know? Like, you know, it's not that important, you know. Just the story, the subject matter of the story is more important rather than why the sun and the moon's up at the same time. So those little things, I guess, the traditional knowledge that we have are things that help us to build. I guess what I would like to see is a more unique way of describing things, a science that's more traditional and in our sense. achieving that's hard when everything we have now is Western. Everything's configured around Western science philosophy, and you know, I don't know what direction we could go with that. I don't know who would believe us if we said anything, you know, without 2 pages of references, you know. So pretty much, I can't remember what else we had to cover or what other questions we needed to answer, but I think that's probably good enough for now. Okay.
I'll probably come back and ask you one more thing, but
Okay.
we'll go through and see how much time we have.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Or do you want Fred to go, or do you want me to? Okay. Microphones are intimidating. My name is Flo Gardapi, and my family background is Eastern Band Cherokee on my father's side and Irish on my mother's side. And I'm married to Tim Gardapi, who is Grovant and Chippewa, Turtle Mountain Band. And we have 3 daughters, Jasmine, Juanita, and Jade, and they're all teenagers, and I have a very fun household sometimes. I'm currently in a doctoral program with Fred Allendorf here as my major professor. And my research for my PhD is focusing on the conservation, genetics, and disease resistant in the Yellowstone and the Grand Teton bison herd. And it's been a really long journey for me in terms of getting here. And growing up, I didn't grow up on a reservation, but we did grow up very poor, housing projects, things like that. Kind of a crazy, growing up, there was a lot of alcoholism in my family and things. And so I didn't have a lot of support at home for education. And as a consequence, I actually flunked biology in high school. And now, to me, it's amazing that I'm actually sitting here getting my doctorate in biology. And because, you know, then I didn't have anybody to tell me that I was smart or give me encouragement for education. The only person that really did that later on after I got out of high school was my auntie on my dad's side, who was kind of the family matriarch as Cherokee women go. And she said, you know, you really need to get an education, but I think you should join the military, and then you can get some money to go to school, and I think you should go into medicine. And she kind of really pushed me to do these things. The military was a big tradition on my dad's side of the family. And both my cousins from my auntie been in the military. My dad was in the military. And so did that for a couple of years, and then went to school and did the degree in medical lab technology like my auntie told me to do. And but she really encouraged me because she wanted to see me. I'm the first woman in my family to get any kind of formal education. My mom didn't get past 8th grade. My dad just barely got his high school diploma and never got any formal education, and pretty much let alcohol kind of take over the rest of his life. And so me even sitting here right now is an accomplishment, not just for me, but for my whole family, and that's how I look at it. It's been an interesting process in terms of why I even came back here. So this time I didn't have my auntie pointing her finger at me and telling me, you need to go do this. It was more or less the bison putting their finger at me and saying, you need to go and do this. And Dr. Henrietta Mann was taking the role of my auntie this time and telling me, as my adopted mother-in-law, you need to go back to school. I don't know what you're going to study, but you need to go back. And kind of one of those open-ended kind of things like, this is where you need to be. You'll figure it out when you get there. And so about a few months before I even put my application in, I said, well, I looked through the catalog, and the thing that I kept going back to was wildlife, wildlife, wildlife. And I kept thinking about the bison and, you know, getting some direction towards that. And so that's what I did. I came back here and I got my bachelor's in the wildlife program. And it was very different to come, and my husband pretty much thought I took leave of my senses. He still does. But so I came back here, and it was I'd already had some education at a community college, but coming to the university level was a whole new thing for me. Some of the things that these guys have shared are kind of similar for me in terms of I've been taught that there were certain things that I can't touch because I'm a woman, certain kinds of animal parts that I can't handle because I'm a woman, and certain responsibilities that I've been given, things that I've been given, I can't do that. So, of course, mammalogy class, where they have all these furs and animal parts on the table, and we're supposed to go look at them and touch them, and write things down about them and know them for our lab tests, could be a little bit of a challenge, but I creatively kind of figure out ways to get around this. And yeah, that's a such and such, and that's a such and such, and kind of get around not having to handle those things, without having to explain to anybody why I couldn't touch those, or why I couldn't study these particular animals, why that really wouldn't be a good idea for me, because then I would have to handle them, and I can't do that. In terms of traditional ecological knowledge, I had an issue come up where I was in natural resources policy class, and we had to write a paper on any kind of policy issue. So I took on the issue of sacred sites. And in his syllabus, he said, please use the resources in class. But none of the resources in class supported my argument, which was that in order to protect sacred sites, we have to get the Supreme Court to recognize oral tradition. And because they don't recognize oral tradition, because it's not on paper, it's not in a book, it's not in DC somewhere in an archive, it lives within the people, it's not recognized. Biblical references are recognized because, well, that's written down, that's on paper, and you can handle it, you can see it, you can touch it, and anybody can go access the Bible. You can't always go access oral literature. So the issue in particular that I took on was the Devil's Tower and why we were having such a hard time with that. So the evidence that I brought in was basically the story that the Lakota people had with respect to why this place is sacred to them. And then I brought in some other references like Vine Deloria and such and things like that, and constructed my argument based on these other references that I brought in with a few of the references that he had in our class, but everything else just didn't work for what I wanted to say. I ended up getting a D on the paper because I didn't follow his instructions. And when I went in to talk to him about it, he said, well, if you go back and rewrite the paper according to the way I stipulated it, then I'm willing to consider giving you a higher grade. And I said, that's fine. I'll just take the D. Because if I had done that, I might have gotten the A, but I got the B in the course, and that's fine, because I wasn't going to back down from where I stood in that issue and the way that I presented it. And I felt very strongly about it. And that was kind of one of the harshest things that's happened. But for the most part, I would have to say that it's been a very positive experience. I've had a lot of support from professors and fellow students. And I feel like I've been very fortunate in terms of pathways being opened up for me to go forward with doing research on bison, which is what I feel like I've been directed to. Well, actually, I've been told, in ways that I can't describe to you all, I've been kind of told that this is what I need to do. And so that's why I'm here. So committee meetings have been interesting in terms of committee members saying, well, you can't pick the species and then the questions. You have to pick the questions and then find the species that fits the interesting question. But for me, it was, okay, bison conservation is in crisis. I want to do research that's related to conserving bison. And this is what I want to do. And I've been fairly persistent about it, haven't I, Fred? But it's hard to communicate to my committee that, well, if I'm doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, that I've been directed to, things will fall into place. It'll all be okay. The funding will come into place. The people who are going to work with me will show up, and it will all be okay, And it's kind of frustrating, and there's been several committee meetings where I kind of left in tears, and because when I selected my committee, I thought, oh, well, they're all there to help me. They're going to be my counsel. And it didn't turn out like that. I didn't realize it's going to be more like running the gauntlet. So, and it's going to be even more like that when comps come up. But, and things are falling into place. Funding is falling into place. And it was like, in terms of the questions, I always had it in the back of my mind, like, I would always show up with a laundry list of questions, but I knew that eventually the right ones would fall into place, that they would be more or less revealed what it is that are going to be the key questions, and that'll be revealed, and then everything will fall into place in terms of getting that. And it really is, and I've been really fortunate in terms of finding someone to mentor this year. So this summer I had a project trained student, and honestly, I could not have done my work without this young man. who was an undergrad. And he was kind of floundering around, switching majors, didn't know what he was going to do. Came on the project with me this summer, went out there with the bison, and his eyes became open in terms of bison conservation, what it meant for his culture too. And so now we're both, I have like this partner that I'm mentoring in the project, and he's become, over just the course of several months, just an integral part of my study. And I feel like when we talk about it with each other, we're like, we're both meant to be working on this. This is what we're supposed to be doing right now, you know? And that's hard to communicate. How do you know that? It's hard to communicate to people outside of this bubble, I guess you could say, you know, this cultural bubble that we kind of understand, but it's kind of hard to communicate it with other people. And for us, when we've been talking about it, it's like conservation of bison is directly tied in with conservation of our respective cultures. And so we have a vested interest in making this project work. It's not just because we want to show how smart we are, how good we are in the field or anything. If anything, we're struggling with some of our lab things, but I know eventually it's going to work. I have that faith. But, you know, we have so much invested in it. And in a way, we feel really honored when we talk about it amongst ourselves. We're like, I can't even believe we get to do this. Like, when we're out in the park and we're actually sampling our bison, it's like, can you believe we actually get to do this? We're actually, like, out here with the bison. And I remember at one point this summer, like, we were figuring out how to move around the bison herds, and we kind of talked to each other. And I was like, this must be what it was like back in the day, you know, when you had to figure out how to get the particular animal you wanted and not get yourself killed. You know? And, oh, did I mention we're doing non-invasive fecal DNA sampling? So that's a real fun aspect. So we're actually going out there, watching the bison defecate, and then trying to get in and get our samples in a timely manner without interfering with them too much or having them interfere with the rest of our lives too much. So it's really been an honor to work on this, and it's also been kind of healing for me too in a lot of respects to be able to do this. And I feel very fortunate that I've been gifted, I would say, with professors like Fred and my co-advisor Gordon, that I know they're meant to be there as my guides. I know they're meant to be as my mentors and my professors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clarice.
Well, my name is Clarice Pena, and I am a senior through the Division of Biological Sciences, and I am pursuing my botany degree. And so while bison is close to Flo's heart, plants are my world. And it's been a long journey, and it's been definitely had experiences on both sides of the spectrums, times when you're really up and times when you're thinking, I just want to go home. I've waited a little while after high school before coming back to college, and I was fairly set on botany and what I wanted to do with my botany degree once I decided to come back to school. And my love for plants extends to more towards the ethnobotanical and sustaining medicinal plants, both up here for my boyfriend's tribe of the Salish, and as well as my people, the Diné people in Arizona. And it's interesting because you're faced a lot of times with the questions of which knowledge is appropriate to share and what questions are appropriate to ask and who do you ask those questions to. And sometimes it's hard because you know that you need that knowledge, but then at the same time your cultural values are telling you that it's not appropriate for you to ask certain people for that knowledge. And then if you're privileged to be able to obtain medicinal plant knowledge and stuff like that from your tribal elders, where do you draw the line with who you share that knowledge that you've been so privileged to get with? You know, it's important cultural-wise with, you know, language loss and stuff, that some of it gets written down for you know, conservation's sake, but then at the same time, part of its medicine is in the fact that it's not written down, and that it's very experiential knowledge. And how do you approach writing restoration papers and things like that when it's not something that you, as an Indian person, it's not a separate aspect of life. It's all integrated and all interconnected, and it's hard to have to step back and approach a certain paper for one class from one perspective and try to get out into the paper what the professor wants and try to be clear and concise, but then at the same time put part of yourself in there because it's something that you feel very deeply about. Another thing too is it's hard, I think, for a lot of Indian kids to have to leave home or to be so far away from home for so long. Gonna cry here. And it's hard to make sure that you're gonna have a place to go back to, or that you have a place with your people when you've been gone for so long. And I didn't grow up on the reservation, and yet when I see the Shadow Mountain and the Lukachikai Range, I'm home, you know? My mom has instilled in me that identity so strong that it's hard to keep the balance with school and with culture, and when there's so many pressing matters, you know, it's scary because sometimes you find that you are a stranger to your people, because you talk different when you go back. You dress different when you go back. You don't know the stories that happened the last years because you haven't been there. And part of you, and it's hard to communicate to them that how much they play into what you're doing. How much all of your work and all of the tears and all of the stomping and, you know, trying to talk to your professors, how much of it you do for them, you know, to be able to go back and, you know, that's part of my perspective is I haven't lived on the reservation and I wasn't raised on the reservation. So I feel when I go back, I want to give something back to my people. I want to be able to show up and say, okay, well, I haven't been here for a long time, but, you know, I'm here now and this is what I can do for you. And I can make sure that the plants that, you know, my grandma needs to dye her wool will still be there in 10 years. Or that, you know, that she will be able to teach me the plants, and even that they're still, you know, that they're still going to exist in 10 years. And to me, that's where it hits home. Is I think that's my calling, is to go home and to make sure that the plants are taken care of. Yeah, the homesickness factor comes in a lot too. Sometimes it's finals week, but you're not thinking of it as finals week. You're like, oh, you know, this is a time when we would go rock bead hunting, you know, or this is a time where, oh, you know, they're probably picking piñons right now. And I'm like, I'm sitting here trying to study things like plant physiology and, you know, medicinal plant class, and it's hard. It's hard to try to tell yourself that this is where you need to be now to get where you need to be, you know, in the future. And the whole, you know, sometimes it is scary going back and it's hard being treated different. And it's hard because you don't want to be treated different, and you know, you want it to be, you know, how it always was. And I'm glad my mom instilled the strong value of getting an education, so I've always had strong support, with respect from that. And it's a little hard when it's a good thing when you tell grandma about your classes and she even just takes the time to listen to you, and be like, oh, good job. It's not probably a big deal to her, but it's a big deal that she takes the time to even, listen about your silly finals and, and all of that. Yeah. Oh, dude. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Ron because I'm really scattered.
All right, thanks, Clarice. I guess I have a whole different task in some ways to look at education and how do I get that into my classroom and things like that. A little bit about me, I'm actually fourth generation Japanese American. My great-grandparents came to the United States in 1900. So I don't have that kind of place, that same relationship to land. There's probably no ethnic minority immigrant group that's more acculturated to American society than Japanese Americans. I can say that because, my folks met in an American concentration camp in 1943 in Rower, Arkansas, because of, who their parents were and the color of their skin. So Japanese Americans have always wanted to be Americans. And so that's just a different attitude and different way we've approached that problem. I am even though I'm a Berkeley graduate, I thought about it a lot. Berkeley's right in the Bay Area, lots of Asians and folks there. And I'm the 5th graduate of the School of Forestry at Berkeley. And I graduated in 1970, and of course it started in 1913. So yeah, I'm the 5th one. And while I was there and on the faculty, probably by the time I left, probably 40 had graduated, something like Asian Americans of some kind, because I tried to work and actively recruit those folks. So my view, or my willingness to incorporate these things in class, first, because of the subject matter I teach is very easy, and there's a spirit part of that too that I wanted to include. I teach fire management within the School of Forestry. So there's probably no tool, no way of life that's probably more associated with Native people in North America than the actual use of fire. So it's very easy to incorporate that in my classes. We do it early on. And in fact, probably one of the things that helped me a great deal in kind of getting a view of that was having Victoria as one of my PhD students. I gave her the assignment one year because she needed you need the teaching experience when you're a PhD student, and having her prepare a couple lectures on Native American use of fire. Now, I took that information, but I took the very different tact. Victoria was in there like this, like she always is. Those white people are going to know what they've done and where they're supposed to be. I mean, that's sort of, I'll just say it that way, because that's what it was. You can see her do that. And in contrast, I've taken the same material, and I hope, and maybe John can say that or not, but I try to present it as a logical, thoughtful way of looking at land and managing land, so that Native students who are in my class actually, I hope they feel proud of their heritage and their background about applying fire to the land. A lot of my students have had my fuels class, and we talk about prescribed burning. A lot of them are there because of that attitude about, how do we manipulate land, why do we do that, and what skills do we need to be able to do that. So it fits quite well with what I do. Early on in my introductory course, of course, we talk, and it was kind of topical today in Victoria's talk, because we were talking about the fact that I brought up this idea of a cultural landscape, and Victoria hit us with the Forest Service term, range of ecological variation. Well, that's really a range of historic variation, and that historic variation was related to the societies that were there. I mean, that's what created the landscape that we see now, or that we interpret over those years as if it were natural. And more recently, the fellow who has my old job at Berkeley and the guy who replaced me when I was at Berkeley, when I came here, they both just published a paper that they asked me to read, and or prior to their publication. It's quite interesting because what it does is it's finally somebody saying and looking at California vegetation and coming to the reality that, yeah, lightning isn't adequate. If we really had this distribution of vegetation and flora and the diversity of flora, we were really looking at a cultural landscape, and hundreds of thousands of people were burning it all the time. I mean, that has to be the way that we were, and they present a pretty good, convincing argument of that. I guess I sit back and it's frustrating because in 1973, a fellow by the name of Henry Lewis, an anthropologist, said the same thing. And he literally had to go to the University of Alberta just to get a job because he, run out of California in a rail, because in the 1970s to say that Native people were managing the land and were systematically getting what they needed from the land by applying fire, when you were comparing that with the major fire control organizations that were in the state of California, that's why I guess I'm frustrated, because Lewis said exactly the same thing in his dissertation. And I grew up, in the university, I was mentored by my major professor, who was Harold Biswell, who was saying that kind of stuff in 1947. And he survived, even though he was hired tenured. He survived all that with having the regional forester, the head of the state forester, and the head of the experiment station all wanting his head on a stick for saying that that was a part of the way that the vegetation evolved in California. So it's easy for me to do it in class. The graduate students, John here, and the other students here have expressed some things that I just want to reiterate. This hypothesis testing that's, our science approach, the scientific approach to answering problems is a very difficult one and a very foreign one to traditional ecological knowledge and the way that's passed on. I've had to, it's only become more important and more in front of me when I have to deal with my Native American graduate students and try to, it doesn't change overnight. You have to sit down and think about who am I and how do I learn, and how, if I'm going to get through this program, how am I going to adapt? And unfortunately, that sometimes is a real frustrating thing, because I don't think people should give up who they are to get through the thing. And that's the struggle I have with other faculty members, in fact, about getting through the program, I guess. Well, I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Iris for inviting me, and just say how much I've enjoyed listening to everybody so far. It's been really enlightening to me to hear about, especially John's comments about questioning. And I guess I've never realized that kind of conflict before, potential conflict. I always tell my students that being a scientist means asking questions. And if you come from a tradition where you're taught not to ask questions, that really is a problem. Yeah, I've really enjoyed that. And I guess the comments also about then having people question you and needing to reference other people. I guess I've never thought of that before. And as Flo said, I'm her major professor, Fred Allendorf, in biology department, and you can perhaps imagine being at Flo's committee meetings on the other end of the spectrum, and it's been really often very exciting being Flo's major professor. And she is, as you can tell, she's very strong-willed, and I've often thought that her committee meetings is a little bit like trying to tame a wild horse, because she just doesn't fit in the way that we usually do things. But Flo has been a great student, and Flo doesn't have any troubles asking questions, as far as I can tell, and questioning people. And my background, so Ron talked a little bit about his background. So my background is my grandparents came here from Germany about 100 years ago, and my parents have even less education than Flo, so neither of my parents even graduated from grade school. But I've never felt very close to my lineage, to my family. I grew up in Philadelphia. I was happy to leave Philadelphia as soon as I could. I went back to Germany once, and I had this overwhelming gratitude to my grandparents that they left Germany. And in some ways, I'm similar to Flo. So when I flew into Missoula 30 years ago, and I remember thinking that this is the place I was supposed to be. And I've been here for 30 years, and I've never regretted that same kind of feeling that Flo was talking about. And in terms of my teaching, so Ron talked about teaching fire ecology, the place where I've had the most conflict between traditional understanding and science has come, I teach the evolution courses here at the University of Montana. And as Iris said, tradition tells people who they are and where they came from. And so when I stand up there and lecture 200 students who they know some of them know where they came from reading the Bible, which is in conflict from what science is telling them where they came from. And so that's the place where I've had to face the most conflict. And this last week gave the lectures on evolution, human evolution, and creationism. And that's something that it's a conflict that I have to deal with all the time. And it's something that's not just from indigenous peoples. I think that traditional view of who we are and where we came from very often does come into conflict with science. And I guess what I try to tell the students is that there really isn't a conflict, that if you really look deeply at what's going on, you really can put those two different worldviews are in some ways talking about different things. So I think it was Pope John II when he went back, and Galileo was found to be a heretic by the church over 200 years ago. And about 10 years ago, Pope John gave a decree saying that Galileo was no longer a heretic, that the church now viewed that Galileo was correct. And what Pope John said, the Bible tell us how the heavens go. No, the Bible tell us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. And I think it is possible to take those different views, the traditional views, and the scientific view of looking at the world, asking questions, and trying to test hypotheses, and somehow trying to put those two views together.
They are right on time. We're 1 minute over. Let me close, well, first of all, to thank each one of you for speaking from your heart and sharing that journey that, is it ever over? We don't know. Let me close by reading to you something I wrote on the plane coming here this morning. We own, as Native people, we own our own intellectual property rights. We own them. Even if it's not written down, they still belong to us. No one has the right to document our traditional knowledge without our permission. When our knowledge is recorded by others, we have the right to insist that it not be taken out of context. We have the right to insist that our traditional knowledge not be taken out of context or misrepresented. When our traditional knowledge is cited by others, we have the right to insist that this knowledge be properly acknowledged. We have the right to own and control access to our traditional knowledge. When I thought about this on the way here today, I thought about the teachings that come from the Maori. They taught this to Daryl Kipp when he started his immersion school. And they told him to stop asking for permission to teach your language. And he was like, you know, couldn't even hear that. You don't have to ask for permission to say, this is our knowledge. And what you do with it is so important that if you misrepresent it, what could happen is our hunting rights could be limited. They could quantify our water, and we would have to say how much we would use. So there's so many things that could happen once you bring our knowledge in, and I think this is where our elders come in. They know far beyond what when we're talking about traditional knowledge, all of the different degrees that functions. And so today what you heard was how important place is. Where we come from is ingrained in our soul. And it's who we are. And how that functions is how we interpret it. It's all about relationships. It's about how we go about trying to understand, you know, what this means for us as we go back home. Are we going to be able, is there going to be a place for us in science? We know that today it's difficult to sell science to our tribes because we haven't done a really good job at articulating and translating into our language what this really means and the benefits that we can do for our communities. So again, I want to thank the students and the faculty members, you know, for sharing their thoughts with us this afternoon, and for the committee for inviting the words of the students to be heard here today. Thank you. Any comments or questions? Penny? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do actually. I think just appreciate the courage of everyone in the panel to talk from their hearts about the struggles and the issues that are going on for Native people to come to this educational system. And I feel like it's an honor to hear what people say. And I think it's important for me as a teacher to know the struggles that people are experiencing so that I can be a better teacher and understand more fully the needs of the students. And I think these voices are really important for that, and I really appreciate all of your sharing your concerns.
Anybody else?
Me? Well, I was when everybody was talking up there, I was thinking about and that is a multi-tiered philosophy and concept of learning in Navajo. Who you are, how you relate to others, how you consciously awake yourself to those elements that triggers how you perceptually and intellectually comprehend your world. And when I with my kids, you don't tell them that when you're teaching them. When they're growing up. You just do it.
I have a quick comment. One of the things that we worked in language revitalization, and that we have found out over our 10-year span in working in this field was that we had to put status back into that language. And I think that's, some of the faults that we have when we begin to deny, or question. Because, we've gone through so much transitional changes in such a short period of time that somehow those lose status in our own, and so that's the thought that, brings to mind right now hearing that, from you. And we have to keep working on that. We have to keep building. We have to keep showing and building on that and put that language back on, giving it status.
That's kind of interesting what you just said about status. That's kind of like, I kind of relate that to how I'm going to go back home. I don't know, did you guys all hear Evan's poem about circles and squares? I was kind of thinking about that last night. Yeah, we live this circle life, and then we got this square life. I mean, for me, once I gained this, I lived a circle life, and now I've experienced the square life, and where does that put me? Trying to fit my role, my status back home. I was like, I was thinking, does that make me an octagon or what? That's the way I was. But that's what I was.
No, remember what I said about going deep? You have to go deep. So my grandma used to say, go to school, but don't change. Go to school, but don't change. That's impossible. But you don't have to give up who you are and what you believe and what you understand to be able to get a degree. It's the journey of going through it. You have to be able to talk to somebody that's been through it, that understands, because it's no good to talk to people that haven't went through it. So you have to know where someone is and be able to listen to them. And you're not going to do it the same way, but you're going to try your best to listen to them and hear them and try to get some ideas on how you can survive and get through. So again, thank you very much. We went over our time.